Why, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. My name is Mr. Dogboat333, and welcome back to Hearts of Iron 4, the New Order as the United States of Brazil. Now, before we continue, actually, let's recap real quick what we did last time. We kicked off the 100 Days Crisis when we have this guy, Auro de Moura Andrade, the Cattle King. Hated by the center, right and left due to his actions, but a political giant in his own right, the son of the King of Cattle, Antonio, Auro first entered the political sphere in the Constitutional Revolt of 32 and then continued it, becoming enemy of the Vargas government with his charismatic speeches and business connections. With Vargas's fall and the birth of the Fourth Republic, Auro ran for senator of Sao Paulo and has remained in the Senate ever since. When he woke up one day and saw a letter with the words, "Be prepared" on it, Auro was ready for what was to come. What followed next was a shock to nearly everyone in Brazil, but not to Auro. The resignation of Lotnar were working against both Quadros and Goulart to become president, an unprecedented act from a so-called moderate center of the Senate. But to allow Quadros or Goulart to become president would be dooming Brazil to either incompetence or communism. Auro saw himself as the one man who could stop this, and he did. Auro sees the moment, and while Brazil has fallen to chaos, Auro believes that a better Brazil will be forged out of these fires, or at least a Brazil where Quadros or Goulart are not president. Despite the hatred thrown at him, Auro continues his current actions. The Senate nation is too divided to remove him, and soon they will be out of time to stop him. Interesting guy. Meanwhile, we have a paralyzed Senate, which is basically an interim government, which is an intrinsically temporary government that exists in between more formally defined governments, whether those be the result of democratic elections, typically military imposition, or some other method, typically rapidly formed in the aftermath of the fall of a previous government. However, that fall may have been characterized, their inherent legitimacy is generally low. Therefore, they should not be quickly replaced. Should they not be quickly replaced, national disorder and unrest is sure to follow. Such interim governments tend to be relatively authoritarian, even if apolitical, if only to ensure that the status quo as it relates to state institutions is maintained until such time as their successor is properly established. At the same time, they are very unlikely to possess either the political will or the physical ability to execute policy of any real significance. The nation, in its essence, remains frozen until the interim government is replaced. Well, there we are. So that's the setup that we have as of right now. I haven't gone over this in my videos in the past, so that's what we're looking at now. Meanwhile, we have a little bit of a issue. I think I mentioned this before. The Paraguay stuff is broken. So, I found a kind Redditor who went ahead and explained. Someone on the Discord went ahead and explained how to bypass this. In case you all are playing along at home and you want that guaranteed boon, so here's all the various commands you can look at. Thank you to Total Sand on the Discord for pointing this out, as well as Fantriani for posting this, at least where I've seen it, in this post. So what we are going to go ahead and do, because we have to tag over. Tag par. So TNO, Mr. par underscore Bush war global Fulna underscore control 10. Do I need to type the E at the start there? Oh, look at that, I do. So if I tag over to Brazil, how does that look for us? Global conflicts. We get a fair bit of a boost from that. Meanwhile, okay. We got that figured out. I'm going to mess around with this a little bit more before we fully kick into it. Alright, we'll probably set the time. We're still in the, tag par. Okay, so TNO par underscore Bush war So, this kicks off something that's supposed to happen. Bitter infighting among the power grind establishment, aggravated by repeat failures against the Fulna rebels in the Bush War, culminated in a military coup led by Senior General Alfredo Stroessner. While Stroessner received support from the cross-fractured ruling party, the takeover was nevertheless bloody, with dozens dead following an assault on the headquarters of the National Police. This guy's a pact observer, which is a little wacky. In announcing his rule to the populace, Stroessner was declared that Paraguay would eliminate the threat of atheistic Bolshevism at home and abroad by joining in the global struggle alongside its allies in the Pact and the Condor Legion. Time will tell if his ambitions for peace and progress in a reconstructed Paraguay can be realized as the Bush War wages on, the only leader between Fulna and Asuncion. I'll pause to see if we get any events related to that. So we're getting a couple events off the top of my head, off of this. Assessment of Bolivian offensive operations in Santa Cruz area, abject failure. It wasn't unexpected, as a full dossier of Bolivia's border clash with Paraguay was passed around in one of the Palacio de Alfarado's many conference rooms. The mood of the presidents gathered was expectedly mild. What more can you want from Bolivians? Someone asked, muted chuckles. It got quiet as grainy images of burning vehicles and bloody Bolivian soldiers were unveiled. The president stared into the cold, closed eyes of a Bolivian boy, face stained by faded red fingerprints. It was a disaster for the Bolivians, but good enough for us. An officer said, pointing at a section of the report, "See here, thousands of Paraguayan troops had to be redeployed to Santa Cruz." And our communications with Fulna confirmed that many of those same troops had been terrorizing them before Bolivia attacked. In other words, we've brought our partners some essential time. Not every operation has to be a complete success, especially when the cost is paid in someone else's blood. It increases by 10%. That's going to amp up that civil war even more. That's dangerous. I don't like that. More war support, though. What are options to boost for liberals? They seemed pretty divided generally. But I want to see if there are any options to boost for liberals specifically. Brazil and Fulna must acquire 50% Fulna control in Asuncion, or 50% Fulna support in 4 different departments to overthrow the government. Argentina and the Paraguay government must prevent this at all costs until the government mobilized against Fulna mission is complete. Decrease in stability benefits Fulna, below 50 stability, the Paraguayan presidency could be threatened, which may give the rebels significant advantage in the Bush War. If Fulna takes over Paraguay, their alignment will determine which of its factions take control. Brazil must thwart the Partido Liberal to expand Brazil's sphere of influence and prevent the nationalists from coming to power. Beware of divided Fulna, however, ambitious leaders may take advantage of the chaos. The Liberals receive a 1% boost at the end of each week. So we can take some time, methinks, on this. We're not too worried about. Although I think it might be over, actually, now that I look at it. Okay, top secret to all members of Federal Service of Information and Counterinformation. Stroessner leaves Paraguayan coup. Forces alerted General Alfredo Stroessner have assaulted the Paraguayan National Police Headquarters, solidifying his seizure of power. The National Police Chief has been confirmed dead by several of our sources in Asunción, marking another escalation in the ruthless infighting of Paraguay's regime, furthered by the ongoing Bush War. Rick Stroessner was significantly intrigued to widen factional differences in the ruling party, and now positioned himself as a unity candidate. Beyond elementalism and rapid communism, little is currently known about his domestic political preferences. That said, there's every indication that he will be an extreme hardliner against Fulna and other dissidents. There's also ambiguity in foreign affairs, where he advocates an aggressive foreign policy based on his support for the far-right Condor religion, in deeper alignment with the United States. If he were to triumph in the Bush War, Paraguay would resume or even increase its sponsorship for rightist guerrilla movements and subversion across Latin America. Despite the risk General Stroessner poses to our national interests, his coup may prove beneficial to our operations in Paraguay. National police not apprehended in Stroessner's initial sweep can be recruited into Fulna. Pushback from Fulna's communist elements will need to be overcome, so our agents should stress the combat value of defecting police. Additionally, military units have been moved into Asunción to support the coup, likely enabling a more rapid pace of anti-regime activity in the countryside. A brutal dictator, and one we must topple. João Goulart sighed and shook his head. I'm stuck here, brother. There's nothing else for it. You'll have to take over for me and head to Brasilia to press my case. Brazola looked at his brother-in-law and nodded, then reached out to embrace him. Don't worry, Django. I'll see it done. We'll see you in the Planalto yet. Just you wait. Unlike Goulart, no one dared block the governor of Rio Grande do Sul from heading north. So it was nothing difficult for Brazola to head to Brasilia to stump on Django's behalf. When he made it there, he announced his presence to the local newspapers and radio stations, denouncing Andrade's duplicity in making clear his intent to see Goulart enter the Planalto Palace as the next president. The PSD was divided on whether this was a good thing, but the PTB was unambiguously happy to see the return of hope for Django's campaign. UDN members, on the other hand, mainly gnashed for teeth. There's hope for the PTB yet. Let me look. Where do I get that liberal support? When Huslinko Kubitschek heard that martial law had fallen from power, he was saddened and deeply concerned. When the news came, though, that the drunken Quadros, whose stupidity set off all this off, had followed him, he was gleeful, but he had no illusions about what this might lead to. Then Kubitschek heard that Andrade, the traitor of the PSD, the betrayer of Vargas's ideals, had spewed out some nonsense about constitutional irregularities, shut out Goulart from power, and then, worse yet, that good-for-nothing bear-dwelling mouth-breeder Frota had threatened to topple democracy if they did not come up with a successor in 100 days. At that moment, Kubitschek saw his worst fears come into reality and flew into a rage. When he calmed down, he called Tancredo Neves, was also quite displeased with everything that had gone down, but two of them had concluded that there was only one thing for it. Kubitschek had to go to Brasilia. So he did it. That very hour, in fact. He shoved everything he needed into a bag, bade his wife and family a hasty farewell, and drove as fast as he could up the roads of the capital. It would not be too difficult to make it there on time, he knew. He'd built the roads himself, after all. Okay, so the government collapse is imminent. And then there goes the West African War. Speaking of wars in Africa, how are we doing over here? They're hitting our tanks pretty hard. So, real quick, before I continue, first I should set my timer. I don't even know how long we've been going. These first parts are going to be especially long, if you haven't noticed, because I want to set up the background info. So, TNO, par, Fulna, alignment, I need a space there, okay. What? Caps. Okay, I don't know what I'm doing wrong now. Bush. No, wait. Okay, I'm typing in the wrong one. I'm looking at dude commands right now. Iceland 100. Sure. We'll see what that does. I just got told to type that on Reddit. Yep, that's very Iceland looking, alright. So we blatantly cheated on this one. But that's all we really could do. So what are you gonna do? Leonel Brizola, governor of Rio Grande do Sul, and his powerful member left-wing PTB, was preparing for the coming struggle. The former president, Enrique Texeira-Lot, had been overthrown by Quadros' plot, backed and then backstabbed by Andrade Lacerda and Adhemar. But Zara Edna, a more moderate Varguist, but not moderate enough to join her father's party, remained in the fray. In fact, she was still fighting with a good fight in Brasilia's Chamber of Deputies to ensure that Golart took his rightful place as President of the Republic. Now they met for the first time. Far from small talk, they discussed first steps. Well, Anna, I will have to hit them in this direction and try to usurp Golart's rightful succession as set forth in the Constitution. That makes sense, Leonel. I also know people I can pressure. Many members of PSD are reasonable, and I can reach out to Neves if needed. As the discussion wore on, Brizola and Lot found that while they disagreed on a few things, namely the direction Golart should take when he came into power, they agreed on much more important things, such as the need to protect the Varguist and constitutionalist in order in the Republic of Brazil. As the day wore on, it became evening, and as Lot and Brizola made more progress in discussing the matters at hand, one thought took more and more precedence in their minds. I can work with this one. Well, we're going to be working with one of them at least. In the meanwhile, out! Out! Came the cries incessantly. One of the grunts quizzed his commander silently. General Silvio Frota shook his head imperceptibly. There would be time enough to silence the traitors. Honorable members of the legislature. More shouting, a few grunts out of their barks of "Silence! Silence!" to the chorus. Frota wiped the sweat away. The room was stuffy. Eventually the tide of anger receded, leaving the general alone in a sea of contempt. Members of the legislature. The Republic has stood without leadership for weeks now. The nation is adrift, rudderless. Those who should have captained it squabble like children. A tide of cheers. Former President Kubitschek stood up, asked by what rights the soldiers had come. The General Assembly aside his gaze from the social snake back to the rest of the assembly. The men of the National Army have always stood as guardians, as defenders of the Brazilian nation. We cherish its democracy, yet we will not let it be used by greedy, ambitious men while the Republic crumbles. But the legislature failed to confirm Mr. Goulart as the next president in the order of succession. It is its prerogative. However, no progress has been made on nominating a new leader for the country. The brave soldiers of the National Army implore the Assembly to solve this current crisis within 3 months. More shouting, sweat threatening to run into his eyes. The general blinked away the irritant. Were the honorable members of the legislature to fail in finding a president within those 100 days, the consequences would be most unfortunate for our nation. The people's mandate will be respected, yet the people have not elected for their representatives to make a mockery of the nation on the world stage. Gentlemen, we expect a solution within 100 days. Brazil must be shepherded through these dangerous times. A final rain of jeers. The general walked away unconcerned. These clans would do as instructed, or there would be hell to pay. The gauntlet is thrown. An unexpected development in Brazil's current constitutional crisis occurred today. Army commanders led by General Silvio Frota have issued an ultimatum to the legislature to end the current anarchy within the next 100 days. Implicit in the Army's command is the threat of a military intervention, where the civilian leaders to fail in solving the crisis. The Republic left headless after the resignation of President Lant following a corruption scandal over the Trans-Amazonian Highway. The following resignation of Vice President Quadros. What began as an attempt by VP Quadros to seize powers turned into the gravest constitutional crisis since the end of Vargas's dictatorship. Brazilians of all political stripes have called for their leaders to end their clash before the generals run out of patience. We are on the brink of disaster. Oh, hi, Orthy. Brazil is paralyzed. The line of succession has been shattered. With the resignation of both Lant and Quadros from the government, the politicians have failed to appoint a new one and have fallen into infighting. Multiple claimants to the presidency have presented themselves, and Pascoal Rainier Manzelli has been appointed president as a temporary solution until the legislature votes for a new president. While the politicians of Brazil bicker, the country falls further into chaos as the military watches. If nothing is done to resolve the crisis, they will certainly intervene. And here we are. Brasilia paralyzed. Oh. That's the name. That's the name of the update. Ayo. So. This, well, we got to start with Brasilia paralyzed, don't we? 100 days crisis have begun. President Lant resigned, Quadros failed to seize control in the resulting vacuum, and the only remaining alternative, President of Chamber of Deputies Goulart, who was a legal successor, was refused appointment to the presidency by the machinations of Andrade. The military, using the officer Silvio Frota as a mouthpiece, has given the Senate exactly 100 days to choose a new president before it does what it has to do. Disorder takes hold in the parliament and the Republic more generally as four candidates, the PSD's Kubitschek, the PBT's Goulart, the PSP's Adhemar, and the Union's Lacerda plan out their route to the Palacio do Planalto. I understand your concerns, Walter, but we will be inviting Argentina to join the OAS at the next available opportunity. Foreign Minister Walter Moraes Salas could feel his jaw tighten. To tack this on to an otherwise routine discussion at the embassy, to show no willingness to budge, Moraes Salas took a deep breath and said, Argentina is a rogue state that will do nothing but disrupt OAS operations. To legitimize it like this, the ambassador cut him off. They'll have limited opportunity to disrupt anything. We'll welcome him only as a probationary member. No voting rights. And to your point of legitimacy, if we don't bring them into the fold, their only options are our foes. Washington would rather have a troublesome partner than an ally of Germania, Rome, Tokyo on your doorstep. Brasilia feels similarly. We'd appreciate your vote in favor at the next OAS conference. Moraes Salas paused and shook his head. The absolute best we can offer is an abstention. The thin smile returned. Very well. We already had the votes. Oh, those Yanks. sponsor some industrial growth in the south. Meanwhile, do we have a GUI? Yep, 100 Days Crisis. Brazil is facing an unprecedented leadership crisis. While the Senado scrambles to settle a new president in the next 100 days, Kubitschek, Goulart, Lacerda, and de Barros call in favors and strike deals to try to come out on top. Once the contender reaches 50% support, the Senado will confirm their appointment. Currently, Adhemar leads with 28% support. So the 100 Days Crisis will only resolve once one of the four contenders reach 50% support, becoming interim president. The military threat of intervention dangles over Senado, a sword of Damocles ready to strike if the 100 days period eclipses or the political situation grows too unstable. The contenders have just 100 days to mobilize whatever resources are at their disposal in order to secure the presidency. As the candidates agonize over their campaigns, others threat that factions will make any consensus impossible. Alright. Well, across we go. Let's move. Our tanks into here in the meanwhile. I want to focus on South Africa the best we can. Gato would always ask for more exciting stories to cover. For being deep in the Paraguayan hot jungle in the middle of a clandestine camp of ardent guerrillas, he had only himself to blame. It smelt of smoked meat, recent rain, and sweat. The canopy was particularly thick, so that spears of sunlight plunged through the gaps. Sitting on a log before a small fire, cleaning a rifle in his lap, was Che Guevara. The interview, the reason for Gato's trek, started rather awkwardly when the infamous guerrilla leader called Tribuna da Imprensa one of Brazil's most reactionary newspapers. About a dozen men listened to the conversation. Gato's hair stood on end when Che stood up suddenly and stepped away to his tent. He'd heard stories of Guevara's capacity for brutality, his love for violence. What stopped him from chopping Gato and leaving him to the animals? Where are my manners? Che Sound returned, holding a thin rectangular box. I almost forgot. I keep these safe for when we had guests. Lifting the lid and presenting the box to Gato, the journalist saw a row of finely wrapped and untouched cigars. Gingerly, he picked one up, and another light fighter offered a light. Che took one for himself and sat back down. I'll make no secret that I am interested in the liberation of all of the Americas, whether it be Cuba or Paraguay or anywhere else. The role of Fulna is to unite the anti-fascist elements of society and national struggle, of which the guerrilla, the ideological cadres, are the spearhead, engaging with the fascists and awakening the peasantry in the field. The Liberal Party, Fulna's civilian wing, understands this. So should your bosses in Brazil. The people will fight. Shockingly, the cigar still tasted as good as when it was rolled. The air had grown unseasonably cold in Brazil as of late. Even as tempers run hot in the national legislature, Brazilians huddle carefully around radios and televisions. Fear had returned to the country, 1,000 overlapping gusts of wind leeching hope for the future from all throughout the Republic. The sudden cold snap, augured to bring storm, had obscured the future to all. In Brasilia, the factions play their games. Chief among them is the PSD's Kubitschek. We sent in Goulart to the presidency as a replacement for Quadros and Lot forestalled. Former President Kubitschek's supporters argued that only he had the capacity to ascend to the presidency within the army's time limit. Popular with the liberal center and within elements of the left, Kubitschek is believed to possess the personal gravitas necessary to overcome the army's hatred for him. The crisis not only brought back the president from the political margins. The political right, weakened by its failures of time the past decade, has surged back into the limelight. In these troubled times, after all, what better to assuage the fears of the army than conservative government of the people? After the collapse of Quadros' political fortunes, the austere Carlos Lacerda's resurgent control of the UDN is likely to help his ambition. Yet Lacerda is not the only schemer within the political right, as Adhemar de Barros' star continues to shine ever brighter. This unlikely couple has been forced into an uneasy coalition to check Kubitschek's advance. 1,000 kilometers away, the unwitting instigator of the storm, João Goulart, sits in the Rio Grande do Sul. Locked out of capital's intrigue, Goulart remains a popular figure, free from the scandalous collapse of the late PSD-UDN coalition. Some within the country hope that Goulart can make it back to Brasilia in time to break the deadlocked Congress. Other than the nation scorn the idea of a king in the mountain coming to save them all. The winds blow cold in Brazil. The coming storm is not likely to have a happy conclusion. In the shadow of your wing, I will take refuge. The old general has seen better days. Odilio Diniz watched his friend deliver a speech to the assembled young officers. Enrique Lot's self-confidence and determination had long given him an iron aura. Nowadays, however, the aura was dented, a warship sputtering into the old harbor after a disastrous battle. Yet Lot was not sunk. The old general marched on. The assembled young officers were of the generation that grew in the shadow of Vargas's regime. To many of them, the army's moment of glory was its ousting of a tyrannical president. 100 days left him dismayed. Had the army not overreached beyond its constitutional boundaries? Disgraced as he was politically, Lot still held respect in the military. Many did not believe the accusations of corruption. Among the young officers, the former president was still personally popular. And while his star was diminished, it still shone bright. Lot exhorted the young officers to stay true to the Republic, to reject the Sorbonne's attempts to unseat the constitutional order. The speech over, Lot took many questions from the assembled officers. He did not shy away from any topic, nor did he try to provide excuses. He had proven himself unworthy of the presidency, and had thus resigned. A soldier's lot in life was to follow orders, whether from his superiors or from Providence himself. Pride had no role to play in any of this. Having failed my obligation, I turn to our youth, to you. If I must crawl and beg for your generation not to repeat my own mistakes, then so be it. They heard him speak, but will they listen? Well, it's time. Hey Lois, he said the thing. Lacerda and Adhemar are not friends by any definition of the term. Even when one catches them agreeing on something, they will react with denial if they hear claims that they are in fact in agreement on that topic. Despite this, the two men understand that they are better off fighting together instead of apart, or worse yet, against each other. Only united do they have any hope of defeating the leftist coalition. This doesn't mean that they like each other any more than before all the start, however. As the crisis rages and the deliberations begin, the tensions between the Crow and Bull can be felt from easily half a kilometer away. Adhemar sauntered into the office, ignoring all the staffers' meek protests. He found Lacerda sitting straight at his desk, staring into the distance. Two phones were precariously balanced on piles of papers on the edge of his desk. Unusual to see the unusually disciplined Lacerda kept so untidy in office. These were unusual times. The same manic energy that brought the UDN's gray eminence to feverishly waiting phone calls had brought Adhemar to break precedent and seek to meet Lacerda personally, without the usual back channels. Lacerda slowly turned to look at this newcomer. A mixture of anger and curiosity danced behind his eyes. Perhaps the latter won out in the politician's heart as he tilted his head towards an empty chair. Why are you here? My position has not changed since our last round of negotiations. Come now, Carlos. The other man frowned at hearing his first name. Adhemar carried on. I don't come all the way to enjoy your sunny personality only. Kubitschek is screaming bloody murder, and every day more pansies and legislators are starting to listen to his doom-mongering about the army. Not to mention that Goulart is irrelevant and stuck in the South. One of his phones began ringing. Why don't you pick it up, my friend? Adhemar watched the other man. The phone rang on. It will be good news. Those bureaucrats you try to bribe are probably coming around to your side. This time Lacerda's anger went out. You fucking piece of shit! Get out! Anger distorted the UDN's leader's trait. The manic energy remained, however. Ambition that burned into an all-consuming fever. Adhemar knew how the other man felt. The phone rang out. Lacerda sighed and picked up the line. Adhemar's smile deepened. Both had much work to do. The start of a beautiful friendship, indeed. Alright, well, before we read these, I'm gonna save here in case I do want to come back to the Lacerda path. There we are. Let's go and do Adhemar's strategy. Adhemar Debaris is of the view that bribes and corruption will be more than sufficient to allow him to gain power. To that he will bribe and blackmail as many senators, congresspeople, and other such political riffraff as humanly possible, digging up skeletons from closets faster than a land developer desecrating a cemetery in order to obtain their willing or unwilling support for his candidacy. At the same time, he will go out and harangue the public all over Brazil in order to obtain their support for his presidency. This combination of corrupt politicians and adoring civilians will be more than enough, Adhemar thinks, to get him into the Palacio do Planalto. It was all over the papers in Porto Alegre, and Governor Leno Brizola of Gran Rio do Sul would have been no other way. Brizola and other members of PTB had begun their counterattack against the bastard Andrade and their sordid wannabe Napoleons of Brazilian military. This counterattack was to take the form of a campaign, the campaign of legality, which demanded that the federal Senate honor the constitutional prescription and ensure Goulart and no one else would be elected president of Brazil. It would be relatively simple, launching strikes, media campaigns, and large protests with a view on paralyzing places like Guanabara, the traitorous Crow's home province. Granted, there was a risk of Lacerda's ilk simply ordering that any protest be violently cleared. After all, if he was the one to kill the homeless poor in a manner that would please the Nazis and fascists, how much worse would he treat dissenters? But that risk was all worth it, even though Brizola made a note to make sure to warn his supporters of the risks. It was right and proper what they were doing. After all, it was a choice between the defense of the legacy of President Vargas and of democracy in Brazil, and the prostration of Brazil, to a whole lot of generals, little improved upon Nazis. With that in mind, Brizola picked up the phone and started making calls. Get me General Mauro Borges of Goiás. Do succession. Right now, Adhemar's still leading, though, even with the boost to Goulart. The sun was hours from rising, yet the printing machines of the Ultima Aura were already running in full speed, pushing the black ink on the white paper. Their final product, coup d'etat against Slot and Quadros. The crow spread his wings, Governor's Lacerda's gamble against democracy. Only Django can save the working people who were printed by the hundreds and thousands every minute, loaded on trucks by a legion of packers and delivery drivers ready to distribute it through the whole city. Work was never so hectic such as then, until a loud knock on the door was heard. Police, open up! Some journalists tried to barricade the door with furniture. Others yelled about the illegality of the timing. No raids before 8 in the morning, said the law, but nothing could stop the tide of policemen who entered the press room, smashing the machines with a butt of their rifles. One of them picked up a megaphone to make his announcement. This newspaper has been publishing fascist propaganda. It has closed down on orders of Governor Carlos Lacerda. Editor-in-Chief Samuel Weiner had no choice but to comply. The director looked up at his work, leaving the building, and the ruins left behind by the raid. Fascist propaganda. The crow never changes his tricks, he muttered, lighting a cigarette. Back when he was young, watching his village burning in Europe, his mother Dora had said to him that Jews like us can only trust our kind. Samuel never really believed what she said, even with all what happened with them. There are always some people for times like that, he thought, as he searched his notebook for a name and a phone number. Getulio Vargas. Top secret for President's eyes only. Military analysts have been growing aware of a weakening government's fighting capacity in the so-called Bush War, but its control seems to have rapidly unraveled in the recent weeks to a breaking point. What started as persistent countryside insurgency by the guerrilla group FULNA has gained the upper hand, such that the government's supporters have fled and insurgents have entered the capital city, Asuncion. It is believed that the government's backing by ruling elites and the wider population had been eroding in recent years and months. Stagnation had also been a problem for the Paraguayan economy, but an inability to end the insurgent left only hangers-on elements in the police and military skirmishes desperately before finally acquiescing to the rebels, who have now proclaimed control of the country. The emergent junta, however, is fractured at best. A triumvirate-style coalition has been set up between pro-Brazilian liberal Alfredo Ramos, former revolutionary general Rafael Franco, and Communist Party leader Che Guevara, all with radically different foreign policy visions and platforms. Sources say the junta has only met once and ended in bickering, and its leaders have retreated into their respective camps in the city. SNICI agents and American intelligence are in close contact with Ramos' faction and are collaborating closely to ensure his victory in the power struggle by any means necessary, but combating Argentine influence as well as maintaining factional strength will require prudence. We had further instructions on how to best to proceed. Order mi progreso. South America's black spot turns a shade of gray. Look at that. Well, that's interesting. Alright, let's head back over to South Africa. The siege regime in Paraguay, which for weeks has been embattered in guerrilla warfare, has finally come crashing down. Leading the final revolutionary assault on Asuncion was Ernesto Che Guevara, heading a motorcade that charged for the gates of the Mborovicha Roga Palace, and ending with him sitting in the presidential office. The Colorado Party leadership has already begun fleeing to Argentina, with those unsuccessful being executed or detained by FULNA. Despite the jubilant scene on the streets, it has been reported that the internal factions within FULNA are beginning to resurface. Brazilian-backed Liberal Party has announced what it claims to be excess by the Paraguayan Communist Party, while Communists and the Febreristas have denounced the Liberals as power-hungry oligarchs. Still, for today, all parties can rest easy knowing that South America's black spot has been vanquished. Free visions, one victorious cause. Alright, so what we're going to do, we're going to try to push to Luderitz. Over here. Meanwhile, okay. Let's secure some support for Adhemar real quick. As the campaign of legality continued, more and more manifestations of support cascaded from across Brazil. One of the most important instances of these was that of Mauro Borges, governor of Goiás. The plains city capital of Goiânia, Borges made a public speech amidst the applause of the coalition grandees and the local population. People of Goiás and of Brazil, you'll know me. As God is my witness, I am not and never have been a communist. I'm not so foolhardy as to close my eyes and ears to see the terrible evidence provided by the fall of Russia to fascist hordes. But let me be clear. If succession does not occur in a manner respected in the Constitution, if my esteemed colleague, Senator João Goulart, does not succeed to the presidency, then the state of Goiás and its people will most willingly fight tooth and nail to defend the national order. The speech was publicly released, however, was very rapidly censored in the press outside of Goiânia, replaced with press attacks by Carlos Lacerda. But the military under Odilio Diniz remained concerned. The opposition of a state as prominent as Goiás could prove a significant problem for their plans. Their fears proved justified. The streets of Porto Alegre were absolutely packed with people. People of all different races, classes, ages, and beliefs. People that were all here to see one man, João Goulart. As his car had pulled up to the venue where he planned to hold a rally, the crowd began to roar. Goulart stepped out of a car with some of his bodyguards, and his aides began to smile and wave. The people come out to see me, said Goulart, turning to his aides. So I'm going out to see them. Goulart began to walk into the crowd, shaking hands and greeting people. The energy surrounding Goulart was electric. The crowd pulsated and moved around him, trying to say something to Goulart or even get a good look at his face. Hundreds of words were being said, so many that they all blended together into a roar of voices. Goulart walked among the people, saying hello and shaking people's hands, while his bodyguards struggled through the crowds behind him. Goulart was surrounded by a swarm of people trying to work his way into the building. Goulart was pushed to the ground by someone he couldn't see. Screams began to erupt from the crowd. People began to panic. Goulart found himself being pulled back up. In his dazed confusion, he looked back to see one of his bodyguards shielding him with his body. He could hear someone yelling to ask where the gunshots were coming from over the shouts of the crowd. People began to stampede away. Goulart looked back at the crowd one more time before being thrown back into his car. The car door was slammed shut, and his car began to speed away. "Sir, are you all right?" "I'm all right. A little shaken, but I'm okay." He sighed and readjusted to properly sit in the seat. He looked across at the bodyguard that had shoved him to the ground and pushed him into the car. Your name is Francisco, right?" "Well, Francisco, thank you for saving my life." The Fallen Alliance is not a singular group, but a network of various agents and interest groups who are united behind the common cause of Colorado's overthrow. While most of these groups orient around and work among the Paraguayan population, the MIN stands out as being composed mostly of Eastern Bolivians hailing from the breakaway region of Santa Cruz. The MIN is led by Luis Sandoval Moron, a paramilitary officer turned revolutionary. He founded the MIN after being expelled from Santa Cruz branch of the MNR. After the latter Hatter fashion? I don't know what that word is, actually. That's interesting. Let me look this up. Oh, had refashioned. That's what it means. They forgot to put a space there. Oh, okay. Had refashioned itself as Movimiento Cruceño Revolucionario, the MCR. He and like-minded Bolivian revolutionaries had retreated into the Paraguayan hinterlands and formed their own guerrilla band, making inroads with a wider Paraguayan rebel movement while maintaining connections across the border. While the men have been formally affiliated with the FULNA for some time now, Sandoval has been quite clear in his distrust for Brazil and his development of the alliance. Pages 12-14 for reference. Information from Chaco and Iguacu seems to indicate that the MIN's main objective is not the Colorado's overthrow, but rather the Paraguayan-backed regime in Santa Cruz, which they aim to target following a successful offensive. While the group is currently not large enough to pose a threat to the breakaways region government, it is recommended to maintain vigilance. If Colorado's are to be overthrown, the government in Santa Cruz will likely find itself adrift and vulnerable to destabilizing groups and agents. Truant's brevity. An unknown variable is always a dangerous. Wait a minute. Well, that's not here anymore. That means... Uh-oh. Alright, in the meanwhile, let's ready the PSP. It's true that the PSP are second fiddle of UDN and the PTB PSD in terms of political power, but with that in numbers they more than make up for in their loyalty to and further for their leaders. Their connections and local strength in critical straits such as Sao Paulo will make them a useful asset in securing Adhemar's victory in the 100 Days Crisis. It's time for Adhemar to call his PSP brethren to arms and kick their sleeping apparatus back into motion. From there, all he hopefully has to do is hold on to the guardrails and cruise down the easy road to power on the back of his loyalists. Well, we can hope. Uh-oh. Salvador looked up from his typewriter. His body was hunched over, beaten, broken, and he hadn't even gone to war yet. For him personally, though, this article and the amount of trouble he had in writing it could be described as a low-level conflict. It did not matter that it was way past midnight. He was in too deep. He was going to finish this. He read again. Suspense in Santa Cruz. Bolivia bears its fangs. Not particularly adventurous, but not unengaging either, he supposed. There's an eerie silence in Machaco. The supplies no longer roll in from across the Paraguayan border. The territory reckons with confrontation, which they address with a when, not an if. They're not fooled by anyone, not north or south. War is on the horizon. The rest of the piece was less thrilling. Reading through it, he recalled the palpable fear of the people and nonchalance of the politicians, and most of all, the stoicism of militias, who he saw as a partial-scale force doomed to take on a full-scale army. He smirked as exchange with one of them, someone of Luis Sandoval, leader of a paramilitary, gearing to take control of the leader's countryside. Apparently Vistado's name could pull some strings. In a way, he reflected, the Paraguayan presence there was a house of cards doomed to fall apart when the Susion's regime did, as fullness takeover provided. At least he... Gunshots. He got down, avoiding the small window just in case, as his manual said. Thankfully, they seemed distant, and he himself did not appear to be in harm's way. But for all the talk of his personal war, there could be no lightheartedness about the real one to come. It was humbling. Wars are more than the papers they are recounted in. We got Johannesburg, and yet the war goes on. The Bolivian city of Santa Cruz, following days of violent crashes, has fallen to the National Leftist Movement, or MEN. Support for the former government had been undermined by soaring housing prices and inequality driven by the rebel department's oil boom. Seizing these opportunities, the MEN's leader, Luis Sandoval Moron, escalated street violence until civil authorities were overwhelmed. Control over the primary roads from the city allowed Sandoval to capture the vast majority of the Cruceño political class. Citing a mix of public grievances and personal vendettas, Sandoval is publicly executing his former rivals at a rapid pace. Informants reports also mention the disappearance of these politician spouses, kidnapped to parts unknown. The brutality and decisiveness of the MIN have thus far maintained order in the city and surrounding areas. Sandoval has publicly claimed that these actions represent the recapture of the Santa Cruz department from separatists and national elements on behalf of the RMNR. The Bolivian government has yet to take an official stance on developments in Santa Cruz, but our contacts tell us that cabinet-level meetings are being developed solely to the issue. More concrete recommendations for our diplomatic aid and potentially military posture will be determined following a decision from La Paz. A brute seizes the helm. Ooh. Speaking from the government's house in the city of Santa Cruz, Luis Sandoval Moron, the leftist leader of the Cruceño branch of Bolivia's Revolutionary National Movement, has declared that those who collaborated with the Paraguay will face stern justice. Formerly wealthy refugees say that his threats are in earnest, describing in horrific detail the summary executions and disappearances of many of their neighbors. But no stopple. One by one. Yeah, this is rough. Well, there go the boars. Not really managing to push out here. Let's head over here. Jose Jobim regretted Moringa was not still in power. Well, non-Baptist politics, he and his staff at Brazilian Embassy in Asunción brainstormed the ways he could personally get rid of him as an initiation process. Before he was ousted, at least there was a sense they were dealing with a certain administration, a certain government, a certain policy that had not changed and will not foreseeably change soon. Oh, and they wouldn't need to rebuild the whole embassy because of all the mess on the streets. There was no certain administration. The old state was so divided, it was as useful as it was right before the old government fled the city. He had barely an idea of who to call that very day if he needed to know something done. The triumvirate government was defunct by now, the factions were all digging in their heels, and only God knows what the prevailing idea of policy might be. As he recently moved back in following the overthrow, he often dealt with missing things. He read of skirmishing and looting as much as he did breathe. He could hear the communists rallying from his office, and signs advertising worker and soldiers' councils dotted of local infrastructure. His only reliable security personnel no longer came from the police or the military, but from the few personal guards assigned to the building by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. All the while, his traditional correspondence within the Palacio de los Lopez or with associate agencies was replaced with radio silence. His daily work more to do with the American operatives and building relationships with ministers. Right now, the only word for it was tense. The worst of it all, however, was surely yet to come. All he could do was watch through a window. I can only send 2 volunteers. That's what I thought. Well, we'll send these guys. Let's do another national focus. Let's do bribes for some. Adhemar knows more than many the effectiveness of bribery in convincing people in general, let alone against members of the political class. People can be turned from vehement opponents to fanatical supporters when exposed to a sufficiently large pile of cruceros. Cruzeros? The fresher they look, the better. With the sword of Silvio Frota hanging over the Senate, less than 100 days from falling on the collective head of all Brazil, time is of essence, and traditional negotiations are too slow and inefficient. Greasing the palms is the quickest and most effective path to the presidency. Promises of budgetary allocation and special finance arrangements should be sufficient to win over some of the more hesitant senators. Interesting. Well, we have 34% right off the bat, so that's already a good sign. The demonstrations in Rio began chanting early in the morning to show support for their preferred presidential candidates. Many outside distributed pamphlets. Slogans echoed through the homes, parks, and stadiums of Rio. They even reached the main governor of the office of the governor's palace, where Carlos Lacerda was in a passionate rage. Lacerda turned to Esther, his secretary, after hearing the protesters' chants. Gather information on the organizers, including their homes, addresses, and family members. Get me the head of the military police. We need to remove these cockroaches from the streets. We can frame this as a riot. It won't be difficult. We'll save Rio from the clutches of anarchy. Also, remind the police to behave appropriately when in the presence of cameras. We can't have images of police officers beating protesters on the front page. Do you understand? Yes, sir. I will begin making the necessary calls immediately. Excellent. Oh, before you go, you went through the protest to get here today, correct? Yes, sir, I did. Did you see protesters in support of me? No, sir, I don't recall seeing anything like that. Lacerda was silent for a moment, staring out the window, and then his face darkened. Tell the police to clear them all out by midday. From the Embassy Brasilia to the Secretary of State, enough in Goiás, I was only DCI Sec State. 1. Fears of military under Marshal Odio Diniz regarding plans of Goiás Governor Mauro Borges and the Vargas-dominated military in that the area have come true today due to leaks of military plans almost certainly authorized by Borges himself. 2. Military deployments in the area have subordinated themselves to the state of Goiás and to a board of chiefs of staff chaired by Borges and headquartered in Goiânia. Troops sworn to Goiás have gone to the border with the Federal District of Brasilia and are now in a standoff with the Guards, who hail from battalions of the military loyal to the chiefs of staff in Brasilia. Tanks face tanks, soldiers face soldiers. I have no report of shots being fired this time, however, I have it on very good authority that the situation is tense. 3. The tenseness of the situation is worsened by other reports that the Mauro Borges has fortified his capital city of Goiânia and other major settlements in the state out of fear of a federal investigation. Barricades, not makeshift ones, but ones conforming to military standards, and machine gun emplacements have been installed in strategic locations throughout Goiás. 4. Further information will be provided if the situation changes. Gordon. Borges makes a stand. Well, our nuclear program is coming along okay. Bolivia preparing to invade Santa Cruz. Following the national leftist movement's take over Santa Cruz, tensions of the Bolivian government have risen sharply. La Paz has declared Luis Sandoval Moron the authoritarian leader of the MIN to be a traitor and refuse to recognize authority. Our contacts regard conflict between Bolivia and Santa Cruz to now be unavoidable. Bolivia has mustered its army to forward positions near the fortified border and appear to be stockpiling provisions of medical supplies for a short campaign. Sandoval is mobilizing the MIN in response, calling upon his party for an unyielding defense of Santa Cruz and to restore proper governance to Bolivia. Our analysts suggest that despite Sandoval's forces' fanaticism, their lack of numbers and heavy weaponry will cause them to be overwhelmed within weeks by a determined Bolivian attack. While the Min have engaged in severe repression throughout their territory, surviving opposition figures may be able to serve an effective fifth column behind their lines. It is recommended that we increase border staffing in the area to accommodate potential refugees from the conflict, as well as to maintain awareness of any Argentine movements. Buenos Aires may seek to use ensuring instability to secure its interests in the region to the detriment of national security. Soon, we'll have one less revolution to worry about. Today, Bolivian armed forces assaulted key border positions of its rogue province, Santa Cruz, with national leadership declaring that the lost territory will be fully recovered. Cruceño leader Luis Sandoval Moron has responded fiercely, calling upon the national leftist movement to take up arms and urging his forces onwards to seize La Paz and install a legitimate MNR government. However, Santa Cruz has limited manpower. Experts instead expect Sandoval's regime to fall swiftly. Both Argentina and Brazil are monitoring the situation closely as the conflict begins another chapter in their long geopolitical rivalry. A hot war deepens a cold one. Well, my friends, on that note, I will go ahead and end things there. But I thank you all for watching. Like this video if you liked, dislike if you didn't, leaving comments, feedback down in the comment section below. I read all comments I get, and I do appreciate any of you might have for me. Leaving comments or feedback down in the comment section below. Hit the sub button and the notification bell to keep up to these uploads as they come out. I have uploads going up weekdays as well as occasionally Saturdays. Hit the sub button and the notification bell to keep up to date with these uploads as they come out. And yeah, you got it. I'll know the rest by now. Thank you as always for watching, my friends. My name has been Mr. Dogbot333. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye now.